So even though I just do team meetings, so I do spend a lot of time with customers, in the market, very rarely with investors, whatever. This is definitely time well spent in my eyes. But yeah, the only, maybe challenge is the follows. But as I said, I don't do much of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the SaaS Sales Performance Podcast. And delighted to be joined today by another fantastic guest who is in the hot seat. Today's topic of conversation is one that is very front of mind for the majority of revenue leaders that we speak to at a daily basis here at UHubs. And today's topic is outbound. It's how do you build pipeline more consistently, more repeatedly, and how do you do it without spending an absolute fortune. Today's guest is very qualified in terms of discussing this topic with me today. And the reason being is that today's guest is building a company which is steering the future of outbound sales. Today's guest is the co-founder and CEO at SalesForge. Welcome onto the show. Really looking forward to our chat today.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Hey guys, my name is Frank Sondors, and I'm the CEO of SalesForge, and we have also a bunch of other products. They're called Forges, maybe more on that later on. But spent about a decade in sales. Started my career at Google, worked there for 2.5 years, and essentially sold gazillions of ads to advertisers all across Europe, and then worked with a bunch of SaaS companies like SimilarWeb on kind of competitive intel, machine learning, SaaS. It's got like the old school AI kind of stuff and selling machine learning to gazillions of CMOs out there. And then I led a sales team of about 50 in my last gig before starting this company called SalesForge. So we've been around for about 22 months or so. So relatively fresh, scaled from $0 to $3 million in the first year, from 3 co-founders to about 40 employees right now, also in the first year. So doing relatively well and scaling kind of further beyond. And yeah, looking forward to our chat.
Frank, appreciate the intro. Frank, if you think about that, your journey that's led you up to building SalesForge, what do you think's something that's important for the listeners to understand about your journey that led you to solving this specific problem?
Yeah, so I think it has to do with what I observed in my last gig. So essentially, back in those days, it was growth at all costs, right? So what that means from a head of sales perspective is you need to hit your pipeline targets no matter what. And that just typically means, in the equation, in the funnel, you're looking at your conversion rates and just looking to plow essentially a lot more heads, meaning more headcount, right, to achieve that target. It doesn't mean more headcount doesn't mean really that it's accretive, as in you're really driving significantly more pipe with every single employee. It was just not very efficient. The other problem was essentially when I was looking at I would describe these companies like legacy companies, even though they make hundreds of millions of dollars. But essentially all that software is orchestrated around bigger teams. So essentially more people means more revenue, so they charge per seat, and they build this software, they architect the software in a particular way. And I was super, super dissatisfied about that. And every time when I would request some sort of feature development or something, it would just never come along because, I was looking to find ways how to increase conversion rates. How do I generate more output with the same headcount? And there's just nothing that you could do as a head of sales. So the only option was just hire even more people to help you to attain the targets. And so I decided to put an end to it and build ultimately a software stack. So we call that a bit like an Apple ecosystem of kind of different softwares that work with each other to really solve the problems of my former self, so that you're essentially able to cut down on headcount and sales, specifically the pipeline building function, and delivering more with fewer heads. And, in my lifetime, as a VP sales, I literally hired hundreds of salespeople and also fired hundreds of salespeople. And, I would typically say, for every 10 salespeople that you hire, only maybe one person out of 10 is like a natural, right? You hire and then off they go, etc. And that's really the max. And then maybe 2 or 3 people can be sort of trained up to be somewhat good as a person that's really natural, right? They're very coachable, right? They take in the feedback, they're like a sponge, etc. Right? So all great and dandy. And then you've got this 60%. In the team. And that 60% is typically what I would describe dead wood. So a lot of people just end up in sales from different walks of life, right? So, and they couldn't just find a job. They didn't want to work at McDonald's, whatever the reason is, essentially, right? So they dropped out of uni, whatever their problem is, or whatever, got them into sales. So they got into sales, but really they just don't want to do the job, or they're not really good for it. They don't get the dopamine hit essentially on a daily basis. And there's gazillions of different reasons, right? And everybody knows, because naturally there's a huge attrition problem in sales, right? A lot of people come and a lot of people go. It's just how things are, And I also thought to myself, why there's this huge kind of acquisition, happening. In our case, we already were predicting that about maybe 3 to 5 people on a monthly basis would just leave the team. So we were hiring in advance because we're just predicting people just either leave or we would just fire them. One or the other, doesn't really matter, right? So we know that we had an attrition problem, so we were like, hiring a few more heads in advance just to make sure we have enough people on seats, right? So bums on seats essentially to be able to attain the target. So then I just looked at this whole problem and I was like, there must be a better way, right? What if there was a way to reduce the 60%, down to as close to zero as possible, and then increase the output of the 40%, right? The top 40% of folks in sales. So how would the software need to look like? What is it that we need to do differently going forwards into the future? So all of these questions were in my mind that I was thinking to myself and kind of analyzing my own problem. I'm not the only one. There's like thousands of sales leaders that have exactly the same problem. I call it the CAC inefficiency problem, essentially. And so you look at, line items, where do you spend the most money as let's call it a software company, and that you're just spending on salaries, you're paying people, right? So really, if you're looking to make a huge difference to the cost of customer acquisition, essentially, you need to figure out a way of how to trim down on the, let's call it the fat, right? Or the people that should not be really there. So you need to, build the software in a very different way. And I think it's possible these days. And of course, when I started SalesForge back in those days, ChatGPT was just coming out, LLMs, AI agents, you name it, all the tech that we've seen in the last 2 years enables you to achieve those superior efficiencies that essentially people are craving for. Now, the tech is there or nearly there. Some of the cases not there, but it's nearly there. And today it's all about orchestrating, essentially, using the LLMs in the right way. So you need to know how sales works, how the funnels works, etc. And there's many good examples of where the tech works very, very well. And then there's a bunch of other examples where tech doesn't work very well. Typically, I'm looking at who's building the tech, and they've never been in sales properly. So that's where the problem lies. And then a lot of people say, this doesn't work really. Yeah, I mean, these people have never led sales teams and never been in frontline sales for years and years and years, doing cold calling and emailing, etc. And then some average Joe is trying to build, a sales technology to improve the lives of salespeople. Unfortunately, I think in our case, you do need that sort of domain expertise, or just you have to being in this essentially and doing the grind on a daily basis, like doing $100 a day, sending gazillions of emails, whatever, to understand what's broken, what's not broken, and how things need to look like. I think then apart from being head of sales or whatever, I think also when I was in the front line myself, right, in closing deals and building my own pipe, so I was a full cycle AE, and I was typically the guy that would have the fattest pipe and would close also the most deals in the company, very, very frequently. I was like, you will be always top 3 or top 1, doesn't matter. And I would always think to myself, why the other guys or girls, doesn't really matter, right? So other guys or girls, why weren't they able to achieve kind of similar attainment that I did, right? And I think in a lot of cases, there's definitely, some things where you just need to be very driven, very hungry, right? Whether that's because you're doing it because of commission or whatever the reason is. But I think for other people, if they were enabled ultimately by AI in one way or the other, they will be able to reach far superior levels. And I think that's possible these days, essentially.
And we'll come on to that point, Frank. I mean, just to back up what you were saying about the deadwood, I don't know if you've seen the recent data from one of our software companies, Clary, but the bottom 50% of all sales reps in 2024 contributed just 7.1% of all the revenue.
Very normal stats, right? So everybody knows about it. Salesforce talks about it, Clary talks about it. A gazillion of other companies will say similar. We're also going to say the same thing. And it doesn't have to come from reports or anything. It's just you know that, and that it's just how it is. It's nothing. Unfortunately, there's also nothing you can do about it, because the problem is you don't have enough supply of good labor, like ultimately, to kind of change anything about it even. That's not a problem. Like, you just can't find, good reps. I think the other problem is that there's just a lot of competition. Like, we are essentially in talent wars. So let's say, even though we don't compete, as an example, as to say software companies, we're competing for the best, talent out there that's available, right? I'm competing against Google, Microsoft, whatever, you name it, right? And they may be able to offer, better comp than I'm able to offer, right? And stock options or better stock option, whatever offering. I remember I used to work at Google, right? So you got nap pods, free breakfast, lunch, dinner. I can't offer that. I'm just a startup. So yeah, that's not a problem. And so if you know that you can't, you'll always be faced with this, supply issue of good labor. So that will never go away, I think. I think it will just get worse, by the way, right? It's just much easier and easier to build software these days. So if that's the case, there'll be more software, and that means folks out there in the market will be able also to choose, across gazillions of software companies, whatever other companies, and that means we'll have bigger problems, I think, as we progress into the future. So then that means you need to figure out how to increase output levels of a single individual. And I think it's possible if you also look at stats like how many employees does it take, for example, to generate $1 million. You can see that is just going down every single year. So it is possible, right? So
yeah, for sure. And I love what you're saying there, Frank. Absolutely at scale. It's really a talent. It's a numbers problem, right? There just isn't the number of high quality candidates at scale. But there are for sure things that we can do to stack the odds more in our favor, right? And we see lots of companies that have much better performance distributions than that bottom 50%, delivering only 7% of the revenue. And that brings us on to the topic of the work you're doing on the outbound side of things, Frank. I mean, you and I are recording this. Q1 2025 is just wrapped up. We're in April. Pipeline generation has got, for most organizations that we work with in the B2B space, it's got harder. We're hearing lots of noise around, email open rate, reply rates going down. You've seen all the HubSpot reports. Bit of a picture for us, if you will, of this kind of state of outbound at Q1 2025. What do you put some of these harder reasons down to? What do you think is driving that kind of diminishing returns that companies are seeing from their outbound efforts? Is it some of these human challenges that you just spoke about?
So I don't think that's the problem. So you have to think always from a buyer standpoint. It's not like the number of buyers is massively increasing. I think the number of sellers is massively increasing, right? So there's more people selling more stuff. And then let's say you're a buyer, right? You're a VP, whatever, marketing at a particular company. And essentially all of these vendors are trying to reach out to you via email, LinkedIn, giving you a call, etc., and trying to sell you something. The problem is the saturation, like it's getting crazy, right? So, and yeah, a lot of companies then start to apply essentially AI, generative AI in particular, to then ultimately compute emails or kind of generate more content and deliver more content to you. So I think the buyers are just generally getting more and more overwhelmed, and yeah, they're distancing themselves to a lot of different channels, email, etc. And I think we're getting to a particular phase, I think, in technology where we're applying a lot of AI agents, etc., to communicate with the buyers. But what the buyers are doing at the same time, they are also right now leveraging AI on their end to essentially figure out what sort of emails or whatever content they should be looking at and what they shouldn't be looking at. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And we're getting to this sort of world where ultimately an AI agent will talk to another AI agent, right? So the AI agent on the seller side will talk to an AI agent on the buyer side. That's really where I think we're headed. And the problem is just ultimately how much noise there is in the market. You're missing out potentially on some really important emails, and you're just like overwhelmed because some people get like hundreds of emails every day, and they just don't have the capacity to process that. So I was telling you, Matt, prior to this, that I have like 10, 20 meetings in a day. So, and I get also 100 plus emails also in a day. So I have to be able to process these emails. And I wish, like personally right now, I hope somebody's going to build that, would be able to process my inbox. So, in a particular way, right? As an example, same with LinkedIn and even my phone, right? So people calling me, etc., right? But yeah, we are definitely headed towards this sort of world where essentially two businesses are unable to communicate effectively anymore due to more, communication kind of going back and forth, more companies, in the equation, more people doing more automation, right? And people then start enjoying things potentially, other things start working more potentially as well, naturally. Like, for example, events, offline events, right? Or, for example, something that we're testing, even though, we run AI agents and sales, etc., we're doing a direct mail campaign, for example, and we're going to send it to a particular audience in the US. And essentially doing things that is just not very typical, especially for our space, right? So, there's definitely things that work, but you need to every year somebody will say something is dead, like the cold email is dead, cold calling is dead, this and that is dead. I think what we're going through is because things are just changing so fast on a yearly basis. You need to adapt. And I think what companies are struggling with, you need to review what you're doing, your process, your tech stack, the people that you have on board, and you need to adapt, literally. And people don't adapt, and then, the efficiencies drop and die. So when you're looking at the various reports, macro level reports, of course, on average, kind of things are tanking. But I think people that adapt, I don't know, they're making millions of dollars, if you look at big companies, let's say in the US, for example, let's take a company called Rippling in the US. They're in the finance and HR space. So we're very similar to them because they also have multiple products they're selling to the same user. We're doing exactly that. And if you listen to the heads of revenue at Rippling, they'll tell you the majority of the revenue comes from outbound. And it works amazingly well. Guess what? Rippling just figured out how to do it well. It's just something that is not easy to do, unfortunately. It's like I typically compare even like sending emails these days as difficult as running Google Ads campaigns. So you put some money into Google Ads, right? You want to run some ads and you want to get some conversions, right, by running the ads. It's kind of similar to email. Email is just acquisition channel, or also LinkedIn is a bit of like acquisition channel. Sure, you can also place some ads on LinkedIn, super expensive, by the way. Or you could apply reps and cold call, right? Because essentially every single channel it's just an acquisition channel, right? So like I do everything, like in my case. And the reason why I do everything, so you have to always kind of think about it this way, that you're definitely going to see increasing reply rates or people being essentially more receptive to talk to you if you've been warming up, let's call it the audience, right? If you've been running ads or you've been doing some social selling on LinkedIn, right? And I'm sort of, I'm making sure that on a daily basis, like at least once a day, I publish something on LinkedIn that I believe is of value. I'm very biased, right? Something is of value, something isn't of value. So I'm sharing, things, around my business, what is that we're building, what are the pains that we're solving, the customers I talk to, what are they telling me, etc. I also did a pretty cool April Fool's joke. I'm not sure whether you've seen that one. It went viral, by the way. Was one of the best ones. So all of these things that you do, like you need to do these other things, social media, SEO, etc. Because if you don't do those parts and then you expect just to outbound just to work without that, it's a bit tricky. You have to think from what I would call a lens of integrated sales and marketing approach. Essentially, when a user sees you across multiple touch points, they saw you on Reddit, they saw you on on YouTube. So we have your YouTube channel, all that stuff. So they see a bit here and there. So when you reach out to them, it's not really cold, because they'll be like, oh, Frank, SalesForge, yeah, I've heard about you guys somewhere. Where like nobody has a clue, but they definitely bumped into us somewhere online, and then naturally you will see more replies, more positive replies coming back from your prospects. So from one hand, yeah, I totally agree. The macro level data says it's not as a, let's call it industry, it's not going well. But then at the same time, people that know what they're doing an awesome job. And nothing's everything is working really well on their ends, and they're just adjusting, right? Because you ultimately need to be testing, and whatever works, you try to double down on that, and whatever doesn't work, you kind of try and kill that. And I think we're struggling, even though we're all smart, etc. But I would ask any sales leader, how many tests are you running on a monthly basis? They will say 0 typically, like 90+% of the time. Like, so you don't run any tests, you don't try to improve your conversion rates and not try kind of compound particular, sort of efficiencies. Typically the answer is no. So what's an example of that? What's a compounding sort of efficiency example? So let's say in our business. So the only companies that I perceive, that are very good at what they do is they would typically implement some sort of automation solutions across marketing and sales using a software like make.com, for example, or N8N. If you implement, let's call it a backbone automation engine that helps you to kill essentially any repetitive stuff that you do in go-to-market or even in business operations, right? Why are you hiring people to be clicking the same button or doing the same queries or worrying about things in the business? If you can automate a lot of that with the tooling is there, right? Everything is there in the market. It's just people just not doing that. People believe that when they have a problem in the business, that they need to hire people to solve that problem. When I think about problem in my business or back in my days in sales, I mean, today I think about, problems differently than back, 2 years ago when I was head of sales, But today, when I have a problem in my business, first thing that I'm thinking of, okay, I'm trying to search for an AI agent to essentially solve that problem. Essentially, it's an off-the-shelf solution. Just like we have one, there's gazillions of other ones, let's say in finance, HR, etc. So I'm trying to figure out a way, if I just plug in the AI agent into my plug-and-play solution, right? If you just plug it into my business, and within days I can get immense amount of value, why not, right? So you should definitely plug that in. Solve your problem like super fast. If that's not possible, then I'm thinking about custom workflow automation sort of setup, right, to solve that problem. So that in our case, we use N8N, and we have literally one guy who's what we call an N8N guy. I call him growth hacker essentially. He builds these N8N flows, like 10 of them on a weekly basis, and actually that you will see the impact of that, like after month 2, 3, 4, etc. So for example, while I'm talking to you, Matt, something happens behind the scenes, and the customers think that it was me that executed, let's say, the email or the WhatsApp message, whatever it is that we're doing, right? So it's just things like that. So that's point number two. The third one, if that's not possible, right, then I'm thinking about applying humans to solve my problem, and that typically means hiring a freelancer or an agency. So we discussed the problem with supply, right? So there's a supply issue of good people. Plus, even if I would find a really good person, I would need to onboard them. I would need to train them, etc. All of that is taking my time, right? And my time, time's money essentially, right? So I do look more at, using freelancers agencies to solve problems that we have. And then the last resort is hiring a person.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. Covered a lot of ground there, but like a couple of things just to double click into. You spoke about your inbox as one example, right? And you spoke about on that point, by the way, I'm trialing at the moment, an AI agent executive assistant. So offline, I'll let you know how that goes. But for this, exactly the same problem, right? Like the time spent to sift through those emails and triage them and generate replies. When you're having 15 to 20 meetings a day, the other biggest problem I find is, you alluded to it, is follow-ups. So if you automated that entire workflow on the back end when it comes to following up with those that you're meeting?
Not fully, but it's a lot. It's definitely, I don't have a lot of I know what you mean, but it's not that difficult. It would literally take me like a minute. So it's not that bad. But I can see other folks, if they had the same number of meetings, they definitely need some sort of, let's call it engine or whatever to follow it up. So it's not that bad. I don't need to always follow up, right? So when I do have a meeting, it's just that there's nothing to follow up, right? We had a meeting, we discussed something, right? There's no kind of steps for me. There's nothing for me to follow up because I'm not doing necessarily always sales, right? I'm doing something else, right? So somebody else has to follow up with me. That's also is a thing. So I don't always have to follow, but I know what you mean. Yeah, definitely that's a struggle. I think, when you're doing so many meetings on a daily basis, you're you don't even think about what's happening next month or next quarter. You have to figure out what's happening today and this week. So that is I think the challenge. If somebody asks me, Frank, what do you think about next month or next quarter? I was like, oh boy, I have to survive today and this week, because the amount of stuff that just happens, and it's great, business moving, everything, building the product, etc., right? And I'm also trying to kill definitely meetings. So still, even if I'm killing meetings, and by the way, I don't do, for example, one-to-ones with my team. To give you an idea, I don't do one-to-ones. I'm just doing team meetings. So even though I just do team meetings, so I do spend a lot of time with customers, in the market, very rarely with investors, whatever. This is definitely time well spent in my eyes. But yeah, the only, maybe challenge is the follows. But as I said, I don't do much of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Frank, I want to double click in to that agentic future that you described, which I think is a really interesting one of, AI speaking to another AI. Just before we jump into that topic, given the context of the fact that you're building AI agents for SDRs, where we're seeing criticism of AI SDRs in the market, what do you think revenue leaders should know before embarking on a partnership with or looking at bringing AI SDRs into their own organizations? Because you clearly spoke about some of the challenges of Outbound being an execution problem, was what I was hearing. That execution problem, I'm sure, will then also stem into how you integrate and embed an AI SDR into your organizations. Help us understand what are the kind of common pitfalls that you're seeing for revenue leaders who are considering bringing AI agents into their revenue organization?
That's a good question. So first, we have to think about, we have to kind of step back and think about the whole kind of space of the AI agent. So this whole space exists maybe for about a year or so, right? So think about it this way, that the whole category is still in its infancy. So that means there's a lot of tech that will work and a lot of tech that will not work, first of all, right? So the tech is not mature. However, once it gets mature, and this is the year when it will get mature, what I call on the tech side of things. That means everything that has to do with computing text and automating text-based or email, LinkedIn, that will work really well this year in particular. Then the next wave needs to mature is what we call the audio wave, AI agents on your voice, etc. That's, by the way, really good, but I think there's still room for improvement. And then the final wave will be that we're going to see a lot more this year is the video wave. Essentially, think of it deep fakes, essentially. So I'm giving you my, you're scanning my voice, my face, etc., and you can do anything with my face and my voice, whatever you want to do, and you will not be able to distinguish essentially in the video whether it was a real video or not, right? That's really where we're headed on this sort of topic. Now, there's definitely, what I would describe it an ICP and an anti-ICP when it comes to implementing AI SDRs. So when doesn't it make sense, for example, for you to even, consider using it? And that's typically, when you have like, let's say a small TAM, you have, maybe about 1,000 accounts, or I think up to like, it doesn't make sense in our eyes to like up to 3,000 accounts. So if you have up to 3,000 accounts as a business that you can only reach out to, I think it doesn't make sense for you to be kind of, leaning too heavily towards automations, AI agents, like, anything around that topic. I remember back in my days, I used to be in enterprise sales, and I think we only had like 2,000 or 3,000 accounts that we could reach out to. I used no tooling. I think I only had a LinkedIn Sales Navigator license. That's all I had as a rep. I didn't need anything, right? Because you don't have this problem of, oh, damn, the TAM is just too big. I'm not wondering how do I reach out to people. It definitely has to be a big enough of a TAM for you to have this sort of pain or like, well, this need to even use some form of automation to reach out more, more individuals. So that's one pitfall. The other one is like, so definitely, I wouldn't use AI agents for 6-figure deals, I would say, probably. I wouldn't use them. I think AI agents are fantastic up to 50K ACV deals, like generally speaking. So you definitely have some criteria essentially for whom this is good, for whom this isn't good. The other example I can give you where it's very, very likely to fail if you are in the red ocean, essentially. So there's literally gazillions of competitors. I'll give you an example. SEO services. So you're an agency, you're coming to me and saying, hey, Frank, I would love to use your AI SDR to drum up some demand for my business. And then the question becomes, why? How are you different? What makes you stand out? Why would people buy from you? And they have no answer. A lot of people that we're speaking to, they don't also early stage startups. They don't have a product market fit, and then a lot of them don't have what I would describe a product channel fit, right? Product channel fit, like the easiest way to sort of qualify a particular user whether they're good for using AI SDR or not is you'd ask a simple question: hey, have you ever done any form of cold emailing that has resulted you in being able to book meetings systematically, right? Whether using a typical SDR, etc., you as a founder, etc. And if the answer is no, what makes you believe that this will work? Because a lot of people think like it's like a magic wand, you're gonna put an AI SDR and it's gonna work, and that's it. What an AI SDR is really good for is like you had some efficiencies in this particular channel, and you're just looking to do it better, cheaper, faster, etc. But if there's no data to suggest in the last year or two that you were successful in this particular channel, what makes you believe that you will be successful? And I think the other way you can look at it is the same. As I said, I already mentioned this example, but you can spend, let's say, 2K in Google Ads, or you can spend 2K of setting up an AI agent. And a lot of people don't feel bad when they actually spend money in Google Ads. They know it's super expensive, but it's the same sort of way that you should look at this. You need to acquire pipeline, and whether you spend some money in Google Ads, or then you have option B to spend some money in the AI SDRs, or you could do both tests, right? So I don't, that's how I kind of think about stuff. So I'm always thinking like experimenting, running gazillions of experiments. And so I'll put money here, put money here, put money here. So these two channels as examples, right? Google Ads and the SDRs, they're very two total different propositions. And I would test both of them to see whether both of them work or none of them work, et cetera, et cetera. So there's definitely criteria when it works, but it doesn't work. So AI SDRs are fantastic when you have a huge TAM, like I would say 5,000 plus at least potential customers to your business. You have a lot of them. I would not definitely apply them if you are 50K plus ACV. So for me, 50K plus is like an enterprise deal. Now we can talk about what is an enterprise deal, whatever isn't an enterprise deal. But if it's like 50K plus ACV, then I would typically, and software, for example, I would not do that. This is where you typically need to apply, you need to be reaching out to your prospects across multitude of channels, aggressive multi-threading, meeting them at offline events, et cetera, right? So that's what you need to be doing. Like, it's just not going to cut. And also, I think the other problem is like when your sales cycle is just too long as well. That is also where AI SDRs maybe are less likely to succeed. It's just that a lot of SDRs have not built to that sort of sophistication that they can, operate for like 6 months. It's because AI SDRs are a bit like a direct response. So the sales cycles have to be sort of, let's call it 2 to 6 weeks. That's really ideal for an AI SDR. So all of these things, when you're talking to a business, we're asking them all these questions and then trying to figure out, and always being transparent, right? So yes, you will see huge churn for some of the companies there because you're just trying to figure out, for whom does this work, for whom it doesn't work. And then also at the same time, so to figure out what is an ICP for this product, you need to actually launch this product across multitude of different businesses. And yes, you need to fail, and you need to embrace the failure, meaning customers churning, but you got those learnings that it doesn't work for this segment or that segment, etc. And then you'll create this what I would describe anti-ICP, and you'll communicate to that particular business saying, sorry, it doesn't seem like you're a fit for this because you're very likely to fail, right? And you just need to be transparent with the customer because it's all about setting the right expectations, I would say. And that's it. That's how I think about it. But the good thing about our case, is we don't just say, hey, these AI SDRs or AI agents is something you should maybe do. Like, we're definitely never discounting the human. So we're definitely preaching what we call the idea of using humans plus AI SDRs in one single sort of environment. So it exists in SalesForge, our core platform, and that should really help you maximize the output levels. So meaning, let's say demos booked as a pipeline, and then help you minimize the cost per unit. So the unit cost would be, let's say, demo booked as an example, right? So, and yes, both approaches, like humans plus AI agents, have their downsides plus upsides. But I think if you figure out a way how to operate both your sales team and plus spin up agents in one environment, these, I think, will be the smartest companies of the future. But yes, AI agents can fail. And this is where then, we would say just use the human part of the software, right?
That makes complete sense to me, Frank. Can appreciate your candidness. And like you said, this is a new category that's been built by the likes of yourself and other businesses going after the opportunity, right? So there's some fantastic practical advice there for revenue leaders listening to this in terms of how to think about the opportunity for their own businesses, which, I think the point around ACV makes complete sense to me. Your sales cycle lengths go longer and your ACVs are above 50K. That's a great kind of rule of thumb to think about. And that red ocean market, AI SDRs aren't going to be a silver bullet, particularly if you don't have go-to-market fit across an existing channel already.
Yeah, but I would just want to add this, why sales leaders should be sort of forcing themselves to test this is because ultimately, as we progress right now into the future, acquiring net new dollars is becoming more and more expensive. Inflation, the war, whatever you name it, right? There's multitude of problems. Acquiring new dollars is becoming more costly. So I think typically everybody's on the same page. That is the case across majority of the companies in the world. Now, increasing the prices for your software or for your service is becoming more complex because you have more competition. You can't just increase prices as well sometimes. Sometimes you just so many competitors, and if you start increasing prices, you will lose customers, right? So then you're a bit sort of deadlocked. So really, the only answer is if you can't increase prices, you need to reduce your cost base, and to reduce your cost base, you need to reduce labor. Like, there's no other way. And to reduce labor, yes, there's now new tech, LLMs, automations, AI agents, etc. Like, ultimately, you need to have superior automation levels, and an AI agent is just a means to an end. And so what I want to say is that, so I'm in a lot of communities myself, and a lot of people are like, oh, this stuff just doesn't work because somebody else had a bad experience, or they've seen some bad stuff on LinkedIn, etc. And yes, it didn't work for them, etc. But you have never tested this as a sales lead, etc. You don't know. And there's gazillions of companies for whom it works fantastically well, right? And they're super happy. But there's other ones for whom it doesn't work. Now, the other thing I would say is, like, if you had a bad experience with one vendor, right, one AI agent company, definitely test the second one, the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, at least 5 of them. The reason why you need to test 5 of them, right, it becomes complex, but because every one of them has built the AI agent or orchestrated the experience of the process in a very different way. And I know that because, I competed against all those companies, and they literally have different data sets, different email infrastructure, different process. When do they fire email? What time of the day? Like, all of that there's like 1,000 variables. What I'm trying to say is, for this company, this is maybe the best vendor. For the other company, it's a totally different vendor maybe. So there's definitely this sort of dilemma. There's no, like, the Google of this category. There's no, like, this one vendor where it nearly always works. So you definitely need to be in this testing mode. So my recommendation is, like, okay, launch a test for 3 months. Typically 3 months is something that you need to kind of allocate. Just launch. So let's say we also do like a 3-monthly thing, and just test this solution. If it doesn't work, like, move on to the next one, because I just don't see a world where you're not going to be using these AI agents, because ultimately, as I said, the CAC as a problem will get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Frank, like, something else I can't help but think about before we closed here. Incredible conversation today, by the way. As we move towards that agentic future that you described of, AI selling into a procurement AI, like, what does the team structure look like? I'm having so many conversations with chief revenue officers at the moment. The general consensus is they're trying to reduce headcount and increase conversion, as you described. Where does that end? Like, what does the team setup look like for, what would have been a 50-person revenue organization in the past? What does that look like in, say, 12 to 24 months from now?
So I would say there's these must-have competencies that have to exist in a lot of forward-thinking businesses. One is you definitely need somebody in RevOps, right? So it's the old school role title, whatever, right? You need a person that knows how to automate the hell out of it. Call it the growth hacker, whatever. He knows how to use NA10 essentially, all the backbone automation. Like think about it this way: somebody needs to build the backbone automation, and then the other person. These are just different sort of competencies that have to be in the business. So a lot of people call those what's called GTM engineers, so go-to-market engineers. I call them sales development engineers. Essentially, a person that's very technical, knows how to use APIs, knows how to stitch stuff together, and how to make things work, how to automate stuff from a go-to-market standpoint, so that the reps don't have to do a lot of manual work. So that means you're just gonna have a lot more technical competence in the world of sales that most people are missing. And I think a lot of sales leaders are not technical themselves, so they're not aware that they need some technical people in the team to build funnels in a particular way. And yes, as I said, so if you're not sure what you're doing, you definitely should maybe speak to some agency, whatever, that can sort of educate you how it could be set up and how it looks like. And a lot of this stuff is very eye-opening for sure. So that means smaller teams, but you're gonna have a lot more technical people. They know how to code, how to use APIs. A sales team, it's just expectation in the market. So if you don't even have one person that knows, how to stitch APIs and do a bit of code, etc., that is definitely a competence that you're lacking, because you're missing out definitely on some stuff. That just to me tells that you're not automating enough, and that means that you will be forced to hire more people. And I'm always thinking about how do I reduce pressure on hiring everywhere in sales, etc. And unfortunately, you need to hire these more technical people to help you reduce pressure on hiring so that you can achieve high output levels with lower headcount. But yeah, so I would say, if you look at also US companies, like Bay Area companies in particular, you can see all of them are significantly leaner and meaner. They can produce significantly higher output levels. We can do exactly the same thing in Europe and anywhere else in the world, that is my take. It's just that those folks in the Bay Area, they definitely use a lot of tech to automate and reduce headcount, right? They always think about, like, if I'm doing something twice or three times maybe in a day, you always start thinking about, is this like an NA10 use case? Is this something that we could automate? Like, you have to be like in the sort of in this sort of mindset. We definitely crack jokes, should we automate this? Every day, like, should we automate this? And we have this like Slack channel, as well, where we like suggest an automation, and it just goes into the prioritization pool, and it works really well. So, like, think of it this way: you need to be every week releasing new kind of automation flows to help your business to get leaner and meaner. And then typically after a month, 2, 3, you will start noticing the difference. You'll be like, thanks God, I've done, I automated these bits. Otherwise, I would be, clicking around, querying things, etc. So when things are going well in the business, you should be informed automatically by the engine, let's call it that way. And when they don't go, even they're not going well, when some things are broken, whatever, some things aren't going well, you should be also informed about that, right? So if you don't have like a system that sort of informs you, pings you about different things that are happening in your business, then you are missing out.
It's super interesting. So in that role you described, that kind of growth hacker role, I've seen a lot of job specs advertised in the last 6 months of like go-to-market engineer, that kind of role profile that's emerged in the RevOps department, for sure. The other theme I'm hearing from you today, Frank, is the future is AI augmented humans, rather than AI being the silver bullet to all of our problems.
That's true, yeah, because augmentation is really where I think the whole economy is headed this journey. So essentially, you'll be left behind if you don't implement, like, literally this year, because everybody's thinking about it. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's thinking about it. I'm thinking about it. My competitors are thinking about it. Like, just think of it this way: that your competitors are definitely thinking about it, right? So why wouldn't you? We live in a capitalist society, so you're thinking about best margin business ultimately, right? The lowest possible headcount, etc. You can achieve better margins today, something that was not possible like 2-3 years ago. It is possible. You should capitalize on that. Definitely think about how to do more with less ultimately, and it is possible. So yeah, just do it.
This has been another great episode, and I appreciate your time and for all the insights that you shared. For those listening to this episode who'd like to follow up on the topics discussed today and continue the conversation with yourself on the future of Outbound, or learn more about SalesForge, where's the best place for them to do that?
Otherwise, you can just go on SalesForge.ai, check out what we do. You may see me at some of the gazillion of events that I'm attending also this year, and so around the world. So yeah.
Awesome, Frank. Look forward to catching up again soon.
Yes.